Okay, guys, so let's make a start. So thanks for coming. So this is the last seminar of this semester, and I'm sure it's both of our sentiment that the technical team has been great this year, and thanks a lot for helping us.
Thank you very much
throughout the seminars. So. Most of you have probably seen Agus around a few times at the seminars.
A few times.
So Agus is actually from very close from here, from Cordoba, but he spent most of his research life in Brazil, where he's been for the last, for 7 years, and then he's come back here to the EBD on a Marie Curie fellowship, and today he's going to present some of the work that he's been doing for that project related to thermal tolerances in animals. So take it away.
Thank you, Chris. So thank you everyone for coming. I apologize for having you to our last seminar on this such an advanced date on the season, but I really needed to make this deliverable for my Marie Curie project, so I kind of had to obligate everyone to come. And so I'm going to talk about what I have been doing during this project, some of the most recent results, and a web platform that we also created during this project. So let's proceed. I think that it is all over the news. Everybody is meeting a lot of news, like almost every week, especially now during the summertime, that where some sort of heat wave or heat or temperatures increase are affecting negatively two different types of animals. Different species of animals are under climate warming threats, right? That's just the news, but from the academic segment we are also developing a very pessimistic view on what is going to happen to the Earth's fauna with respect to climate warming. The perceptions are that there are going to be important biodiversity losses and potentially extreme redistributions of biodiversity that are going to affect too many species across the world. But I think that we can try and understand this process a little bit, and with this talk I will try to show what I have been trying to advance at this respect. So one of the things that we are much concerned about the climate warming, right? Like this rapid warming. This is nothing strange to the Earth. The Earth dynamics is accompanied by very sometimes abrupt and extreme changes in temperatures. And right before humans or potentially mammals existed, and right now we are at a very cool period, actually, according to the most recent estimates. What is happening is that with our activities, with gas emissions, all the machinery and all the changes in albedo that we are doing to our little Earth, we are creating a surge in temperatures, a very fast increase in global average temperatures, right, on the Earth, which is what is alarming us. Despite we come from an Earth that should be somehow, used to these strong changes, right? Just to put a little bit of context, if we keep on with the production of greenhouse gases, we are going to soon reach levels similar to those that have seen alligators in the Arctic, which also suggests that the redistribution of fauna across the Earth could be quite dramatic, quite large. But the problem with I have a little bit of a problem with averages, because averages they are all sort of in the middle. They are not extreme. They seem attractive in that sense, but I think they hide a lot of information, and that's particularly true when you have geographic heterogeneity in the behavior of ecosystems. And I think that's very nicely shown in this animation from NASA, where it is showing not only changes in global mean temperatures from the 1850 to almost nowadays, but it's also showing the geographic heterogeneity of that. Of course, that with limited resources to make such estimation at the beginning of the previous century. But still you can see that as temperature rise, you have areas in which you have much more a strong increase in temperatures, and other areas in which you can have also even colder temperatures, right? So with the increase in average temperatures, what you have is a change, a redistribution of temperatures, right? That means that it's important to start mapping this phenomenon in order to get more accurate predictions of what's going to happen with fauna. So far, what we know is that fauna, similarly to what this yet another animation does of greenness on land across seasons, the fauna, when climate changes, it sort of does the same in a much slower process, and it adjusts its distribution to the conditions where the animals can live in. That means that as climate changes and the Earth changes and the habitats track these changes across the Earth, the animals also need to track these changes geographically, and that means losing populations at one side and gaining some new populations, hopefully, at the side that is becoming more suitable, right? So, okay, so nothing new under the sun with climate change. What's the problem then? I think that a huge part of the problem with climate change arises from our current conservation system, which has only been able to preserve little unfragmented areas of wild habitat. When this happens, most of the animals they are not able to migrate to geographically track the changes in climate, and that means that at most of these, probably at most of these conservation units, at most of the patches of wild habitats, there are going to be populations that we still don't know which, that are going to be in peril of extinction because they won't be able to create new populations, colonize new sites at more suitable places as the climate becomes warmer and warmer. So we are going to have to find out a way of identifying these populations in peril and somehow save them or provide them some way out. This thing is quite complicated because even at a very single locality, you find a lot of thermal heterogeneity, and that makes it very difficult to summarize the thermal environment with a single parameter. It's easy to become crazy. You start looking at how many parameters you could use to summarize the variation. If you just go to a place like a very hot place, a dry scrubland in the center of Brazil, you can find that at exposed soils, temperatures reach values absolutely crazy, like over 70 degrees, which is deadly for almost any animal that it can get you a second degree burn. But then just a few centimeters away, you find temperatures that are much lower, so much milder, like below 40s. That's nothing for whoever is used to pass a summer here, right? So if you don't summarize this heterogeneity well, you won't be able to make meaningful inferences on what is the true vulnerability of a species in a single site. Imagine for a large geographical area, right? So one thing that is interesting is not using the means. The mean values, they hide the interesting information, I think, most of the times. If you take the mean value for a whole day at the hottest microhabitat here, you will get a very low temperature because despite it reaches for a very short periods very high temperatures that could kill an animal, most of the time is spent at much lower temperatures. Likewise, if you take the average of the whole habitat, which many studies do, you get even lower averages. So that gives you very little power to detect a signal that could be useful to identify thermal restrictions on where the animals could be. So here I just presented a theoretical organism thermal limit, the maximum temperature that an organism could withstand. And they often range between 30 and over 40 degrees. So it makes very difficult. While at the same time, if you pick the maximum temperature at each place, at each microhabitat, you can know immediately which microhabitat is going to be inhabitable for that species and which is going to still allow the animal to remain, right? So when this temperature becomes too high, then the problems come. We already know that animals thermoregulate. That means that they are going to use this thermal heterogeneity to try and survive at the places where they live. Why do most of them, either if you take ectothermic animals like lizards or insects, or if you take endothermic animals like birds or lions, they're going to try to find a thermal shelter, which requires to go to the shade or to dig a little bit, right? Look for water. And what do they do this? They do this because there are physiological constraints on the range of temperatures at which they can function properly. If you're talking of ectothermic animals that cannot produce enough heat from their metabolism to keep the temperature sort of constant, and they depend a lot on environmental temperature, what you observe is that several different functions change with body temperature, and this body temperature, we said, it's heavily impacted by environmental temperature. So when they are performing at very, very cold temperatures, they don't perform very well, and they perform increasingly well until they reach a peak, what we call a thermal optimum for these functions, and then they fastly drop down, they fall down in performance until they reach a critical thermal maximum that block their function and that can kill them almost immediately. So that's why animals, when given a chance, they are going to prefer, if you record their temperatures and you give them a chance to thermoregulate, they're going to prefer temperatures that keep them at optimal levels when active. This happens for most animals across the earth, which are the ectothermic animals. If you think of endothermic animals like birds or mammals, they can keep their performance constant across a much wider range of temperatures. But that doesn't mean that they don't have thermal limits. There are temperatures that are going to kill them, depending on the species. But also before they reach that thermal levels, they have limits, the upper and lower limits to their thermoneutral zone. This thermoneutral zone is a zone in which they can perform without needing to make changes in the metabolic rate. And that means that whenever they get out of this range of temperatures, they're going to need more water and more energy to survive at the place they live. They're going to be demanding more. That's going to be the environment is going to become harsher to live, harder to live in. So, what does this mean for population vulnerability? Well, the main this can have several different implications for population vulnerability. One of them is that when temperatures become too harsh for them to be at several of the microhabitats, they are forced to go and hide and concentrate under these thermal refuges. And if these thermal refuges are concentrated, they're going to have to compete with their own species, with other species that might be eventually even more adapted to hotter temperatures. And at some point, they might need to leave these refuges and try to find another. And for that, need to cross much worse conditions, as we could see in the previous example of a single locality. Like from these already hot 38 degrees, you could have to cross passes. You have to pass through areas over 60 degrees at some points, at the most extreme situations, right? So this is the problem. This is the problem for vulnerability. This is what causes vulnerability of populations at a single locality. But now scientists, we want to map things. As we said, it's important to map things in geographic scales, so we can infer more and we can make these observations more useful from the perspective of the management of reserves, etc. Right? And we do that in using three basic approaches. very nicely reviewed by Michela Pacifici and collaborators. One of these approaches consists in making correlative models, possibly most of you are familiarized with, so I will pass superficially over them. These correlative models, what they do is that they get different presence data, like locations where a given species has been found, and compare that with available environmental conditions like temperatures, maximum temperatures of the year, minimum temperatures, precipitation, amount of vegetation cover. You can extract these values for each of these locations where you know a species is living, and then you correlate this in order to predict the probability of occurrences of that species given the different levels of each of these variables. When you do that, you can identify the geographic limits for a given environmental variable. For example, if we are talking of temperature, we could think that this could be the maximum thermal limit, the geographic maximum thermal limit of that species, right? When you do that, you can project that again and identify these limits onto maps, even over places where you don't have localities. Or you could, if you have another database with temperatures for the future, with predictions, you could also predict these temperatures or these regions in the future. This, despite very convenient because they use data that are readily available, these models, they have a fundamental problem, which is they don't really use the actual thermal tolerance of a species. So if you don't have it, then it's very difficult to make these predictions because you just know where you found the animal, don't know what the animal is actually able to tolerate, right? And we still don't know how these two limits, the thermal limits and the geographic thermal limits, match, right? Which is precisely what I'm going to talk about later. There is another way to do this, which is a much more, is right now the state of the art, a very comprehensive method to do this, which is called mechanistic models. And what these mechanistic models do is to combine a microclimate models, that is a set of heat and mass exchange equations that allows you to identify, that uses also a very wide range of different spatial databases on all sorts of things like elevation, slope, wind speed, cloud cover. It needs a lot of data to model the microclimate of a given individual. And then it uses a lot of data on the morphology, physiology, behavior to make a description of what the animal can do to thermoregulate and to maintain its energetic and water demands. So it's going to combine these two models, and by doing that across many, you can think already that this is already a very hungry, data hungry and heavy model to run. But then if you run that across thousands or millions of localities, then you can get very accurate maps of activity time, of metabolic demands, of restrictive temperatures. You can do that. The only problem with this system is that it's it's super heavy and super data hungry. So it seems to be impractical to apply for a high number of species. You could do that for making deep studies on a specific ones, but not in order to map which are going to be the vulnerable species of the next decades. So now we have the third approach, which is my favorite because it combines a mechanistic view with practicality, in my opinion, which is the trait-based model. In this case, if you want to identify thermal vulnerability, you want to know which species or populations are going to be extirpated by temperatures, what you do is you measure the tolerance of this species and you compare this value to the temperatures in a map. All right? The map, the problem with this is that you need to choose the right value here, and if there is one, and the right representation of the thermal environment, which I showed that is not so easy because you can take so many different possibilities, right? So I'm going to show a few of the problems that you need to go through in order to decide whether your thermal tolerance parameter has it's useful to identify vulnerability. One of the first problems that you encounter when you're trying to use a parameter of heat tolerance to identify thermal vulnerability is that you have so many different. There are so many different in the literature. They have been measured, sometimes associated to specific groups with specific methods for specific groups. So it's very difficult to choose one. Anyway, I compiled I made a compilation of literature data on these parameters and classified, with the help of Miguel, we classified them in different levels of heat stress that they create, that these levels of temperature create to the individuals. When you measure the critical thermal maximum of individuals, which is often used for ectothermic animals, small animals in general, you can kill them in a matter of an exposure of minutes. So this is a very stressful method of measure heat tolerance. Then, more applied to endotherms or to lizards, are estimates of the limits of optimal physiological temperatures. What this means? This means to measure the upper limit of the thermoneutral zone for the endotherms and measure the optimal spring speed temperature for lizards, and I'll explain a little bit how. Later, there has been a lot of different parameters of behavioral thermal tolerance. People have been measuring behavioral thermal tolerance mainly in lizards, and they have done it in very different ways that we're going to take a look very quickly. So first, the critical thermal maximum, it has been adapted to different animals, but basically what it means is to, in a controlled manner, to heat up an animal and check its ability to locomote. So when it reaches to a moment in which the animal is not able to locomote, before it's dead, it cannot be dead because otherwise you lose the point. You have to identify the thermal level and then recover the animal. All right, and that's sort of how it works for most of ectothermic animals. Although there are several different adjustments to groups and things. Another way to measure the upper limits to physiologically optimal temperatures in endotherms is mostly done using metabolic chambers. In these metabolic chambers, it is possible to measure the metabolic rate of these animals at different temperatures. You go changing the temperature, and you measure the metabolic rate, and then you can identify this upper limit to the thermoneutral zone, okay? As a temperature over which is going to be hard for the animal to stay in a place. When we do that, and we have been doing that mostly for lizards, what we mostly do is we make them run at different temperatures, right? And as it happens for almost any physiological function in an ectothermic animal, what you will have is the animals run faster and faster until they reach an optimum, and then they start to quickly decrease their performance. And that's how then you fit a function and find an optimal level that is going to increase this edge in the optimal temperatures for the animal. Okay. No? Okay. So then there is several different measures of behavioral thermal tolerance. Like some people have been measured when the animals pant. This again, this has been these methods, they have been mostly applied to lizards and other squamates. And some researchers measure when the animal pants as a way to cool off its head and keeps active. Other people measure the temperatures at which an animal escapes from a refuge that otherwise will be comfortable for it. Others put lizards inside of a thermal gradient and then register the temperature, the body temperatures. And by doing that, they can, what? By doing that, they get a frequency distribution of body temperatures from which you can also get the maximum voluntarily affected temperature, you can get the mean. This is what has been mostly done all across the scientific literature. And also a very widely accepted parameter is the upper set point, which coincides grossly with the 75th percentile of the body temperature distribution. And that's a parameter that is often used to identify whether a temperature is too hot for a lizard. All right, so as you can see, there are so many different parameters to choose among. No. And okay, all right. Advancing now. Well, and there are other problems to use heat tolerance. So heat tolerance could be initially thought as useful, but they have a lot of problems too. Like one problem with any physiological trait is that they vary depending on the physiological state of the animal. For example, these mean body temperatures or preferred body temperatures, they change depending on the hydration level of the lizards, as it's been nicely shown by Sanolo and collaborators. The dehydrated lizards are going to select temperatures, lower temperatures more frequently, and hydrated lizards are going to prefer higher temperature. Likewise, hydration level, the acclimation process, the temperatures at which animals have been exposed previously to be measured, are going to affect our measures of heat tolerance. In this case, Turriago and collaborators show how exposing, actually these were tadpoles, right? But another tadpoles subjected to different raising temperatures, they show different critical thermal maximum. As they are kept at higher temperatures, they can increase their critical thermal maximum a couple of degrees sometimes, all right, or 3 degrees sometimes. So they can change. There are more problems. Some of the problems are that heat tolerance, like this critical thermal maximum measured by Fungi and collaborators on Fundulus, they can change geographically. So populations that are at hotter sites could have higher CTmax than populations that are colder sites. That happens also across lacertid lizards that have been comprehensively measured by Hernando Perez. This is a problem. The thing of geographic variation is a particular problem because despite we have measured heat tolerance all across the world, there are many measures of heat tolerance are super widespread across the world. They have been measured at idiosyncratic sites with respect to the geographic thermal limits. So very often, the measuring place is a place right within the best habitat for the species. So it is very likely that the species or the populations living at the geographic thermal limits of the species, they might have different CTmax or different parameters of thermal tolerance. So lots of problems. And then the last one is that very likely dispersal and biotic interactions should also be important to set the geographic ranges of species. So would be a parameter of heat tolerance actually able to identify the hottest site or the temperatures of the hottest site at which a species can live? Like it seems that there are too many problems for that to happen actually. However, I think there are possibilities for this to happen because if you have a higher thermal tolerance, you have an important advantage to live at these geographic thermal limits, and that probably helps you with biotic interactions and also to dispersal, right? As I said, dispersal is going to be often limited by the tolerance, the interaction between the tolerance and the environmental and the thermal environment. So this is what I tried to address during the Marie Curie project. It is the main work of the Marie Curie project, which was to evaluate if heat tolerance, as so far measured by scientists, could allow identify these geographic thermal limits and therefore be able to identify which populations of each species are actually vulnerable to climate warming. Okay? If these heat tolerance parameters cannot really constrain the distribution of species, then why will we be using them, right? Why will we be measuring them? At least for this matter, right? Okay, so what I did with the help of a student is to compile a large data set using previously published large data sets and also adding more new information on new published studies for several groups of species, including invertebrates, ectothermic animals from terrestrial ecosystems and for marine ones. Although I'm not going to talk about this one because it will complicate much more the talk. You can see details about this in the preprint, which is already available in the bioarchive or bioarchive. And well, the point is that for each of these categories of heat tolerance parameters, we were able to compile several hundreds or at least several tens of species to identify whether there would be a relationship between heat tolerance and the maximum temperatures that the populations can withstand. So apart from heat tolerance, what you need is to have a measure of the geographic thermal limits. The geographic thermal limits is nothing else than the maximum temperatures recorded at the hottest known location of each species. So for each species with data, you need to find out the hottest known location and then obtain these different estimates of maximum temperatures that come from available databases like Microclim or CHELSA or other marine ones such as MARSPEC or BioOracle, etc. With this data, I wanted to see whether variation in heat tolerance is going to be able to constrain the maximum values of the response variable, right? I want to know if there is going to be a triangle here. The problem is many species are going to live at places that are colder for their hot tolerance. They have evolved with hot tolerance in the past, but now they're living at cold places. So they should probably not be important for our analysis, or at least not restricted by heat tolerance. But others, they should be. To separate these species, and also to include phylogenetic relatedness, I use quantile regression analysis that allows you to regress separately the effects or the constraints that the x variable creates over the response variable, right? So in this case, the species represented by the 90th percentile would be the species where at their hottest location are most challenged by the environmental temperatures, given their own heat tolerance. Because you can see that there could be a species living globally with there could be a species with high thermal tolerance living at either cold site or hot sites, right? Or places at which temperatures are globally cold but are still hot for species that are cold adapted, right? So that's why you need to separate these different quantiles. In the graphs that you're going to see right now, you also have this dotted line, which represents the identity line. It shows when environmental temperatures are over or below the heat tolerance parameter. Okay, that helps to interpret a little bit. And also, the lines, when the lines are solid, that means that the regression was statistically significant. And when it is it is discontinuous, it means that it's not statistically significant. Okay, so let's take a bit. Before I go, I want to thank Marco Gerasi from the Sapienza Rome University of Rome, because he developed a package for doing this quantitative analysis. Not exactly this, but doing quantile regressions using mixed models, and that has been absolutely fundamental to do this analysis. So let's take a deep breath and just look at a few essential of these lots of graphs. Okay, bear with me, don't get scared. Basically, what we find here across terrestrial ectothermics is that, first, heat tolerance is generally strongly correlated and significantly correlated with Tmax, with geographic thermal limits. So yes, the critical thermal maximum measured in this very stressful way actually works. It allows you to predict temperatures, the maximum temperatures at which species can live. One surprising thing here, though, is that the arthropods and anurans, which have been for a long time thought of less affected by extreme temperatures because they can protect themselves in humid places, buffered places, they actually need heat tolerance to increase their geographic thermal limits. All right, so in order to live in a hotter place, to reach a hotter place, they need to evolve a higher CTmax. It's not just hiding that you're going to get away. All right. In contrast, for the different databases, reptiles are very weakly related. The CTmax of reptiles is very weakly related to the maximum temperatures they can live. So there is something that is helping, or this suggests that there is something that is helping lizards and other reptiles like turtles or tortoises to survive events, survive heat waves and things without having to evolve that much critical thermal maximum. We can see here that the results are sort of constant among the different databases. So I think the conclusions are sort of reliable. Now, when we look at the upper limits to optimal temperatures, we find again an interesting and surprising result, which is endoderms, which have been always considered as more liberated animals with respect to temperatures, they seem to have at least as strong or stronger constraints of heat tolerance on their maximum temperatures they can live at compared to lizards. Lizards very rarely show strong constraints of heat tolerance on their geographic distribution limits, which is also consistent with what we found before, but it's very surprising because reptiles have been like a flagship of thermal vulnerability studies. Okay, and now the highest diversity of possibilities here. Let's go very smoothly here. Among the different thermal parameters of behavioral thermal tolerance, a few of them didn't work well. Like for example, panting temperatures, they don't seem to correlate well with the geographic thermal limits. And also the maximum temperatures registered in thermal gradients, they also don't seem to work well. I already had reviewed literature on this procedure and I found several important methodological problems, so that might explain why this measure, despite meaningful, is not correlated. Also, we have less observations there, so that could be behind that. There are a couple of measures that work very well, in my opinion. One is the voluntary thermal maximum, and the other is the voluntary thermal maximum measured in the field, the maximum body temperature measured in the field. These temperatures, they had strong correlations across the different databases. And what it is most important for me is that, at least in the case of the voluntary thermal maximum measured experimentally, you can identify that for the database that is representing the temperature of the air in the shade under our thermal refuge, but not digging, these temperatures are always below the temperature. The voluntary thermal maximums are always the voluntary thermal maximums are always below of the maximum temperature measured in the shade, which means that the temperature of these shades might be the last refuge for many of these animals at the border of the distribution. So I think that this is particularly interesting. Also because you can see the border is super similar to the identity line, given all the constraints and all the problems that we saw before. Finding such a similarity, I don't know, it seems to me attractive, at least to go deeper into that relationship. The last thing that we found, which was very interesting, is that one of the most used indices, this upper set point, actually correlates negatively across the different databases. It correlates negatively with the maximum temperatures, which suggests that animals that are living at colder places are having a higher upper set point, which possibly suggests, because this upper set point is not a super stressful, it's not a stressful at all temperature, it suggests that what lizards are doing with this parameter is actually getting a little bit warmer when they are in cold places. It's like, it seems like it represents more than a heat tolerance measure, a measure of the adjustment to cold places, to cold habitats. Finally, we found correlations with mean temperatures, but look at these correlations, right? Like, it's hard to identify restrictions here, and these correlations could come from the super high amount of observations that we have for this parameter that gives a lot of statistical power, because we have more than 800 data values for that. Okay. When we look at the size effects of the previous correlations that I showed, what we found is that the species living at the 90 percentile, so species that are more challenged by the heat temperatures, by the maximum temperatures at the hottest populations, they have the heat tolerance much more strongly correlated with these temperatures. The correlation between heat tolerance and maximum temperatures are so much more important for species living at challenging places, which indicates that species are able to evolve, actually able to respond to these selective pressures at challenging places by evolving higher CTmax, which is a bit contrary to what is being said across the literature. This has been found for almost any of the parameters tested. You can see only in the upper set point, which we found that has negative correlations. In this case, the correlation is more important precisely for species living at the colder sites, which is also suggestive that the upper set point, instead of being a heat tolerance measurement, is a measurement of cold adaptation. It's some sort of cold adaptation, or some sort of cold adaptation. So okay, so we're finishing with the results, and the main implications is that despite all the things, all the opposite factors that might avoid the utility of heat tolerance, it can actually work. It seems that it can actually work, but not always. But it will be most useful for species that are actually challenged by the thermal environment. For reptiles, it could be particularly difficult to identify thermal vulnerability using heat tolerance, although the results suggest that the voluntary thermal maximum measured in an experimental way or in the field could be particularly helpful. Behavioral parameters, as I said, they are desirable because you don't inflict that much stress on the animals. So I think it's important to try and develop them. But they, as you can see, several of them, they didn't work. So it's important to go carefully developing them in order to come out with actually useful parameters. And as I already repeating, the heat tolerance is most useful at places where populations are actually challenged. But the only way to know that is to actually measure that, that data. And the problem with that is that we have very little data for any taxonomic group. For these groups that I think are the most studied so far, if the total amount of species was represented by the Torre Sevilla here, we will just like people visiting the Torre Sevilla, which means that we have very little data to know which of these species spreading all across the world are right now under a vulnerability situation against with respect to climate warming, right? So that's why I, with the help of some people here, created this platform to try and boost the gathering of thermal tolerance data and to use it to provide thermal vulnerability reports. So the web platform has recently born, but it has noble purposes, noble missions. One is to provide reports for conservation agencies all across the world on which species are in vulnerability at which place in a space, like make maps with thermal vulnerability reports on which they can develop conservation strategies or make deeper studies to identify who is really in need of conservation strategies. A second thing is to use these available data sets and to gather published data to use them in the reports and to inform the vulnerability reports too, even when they are not available for all the species. And also to provide and to promote awareness on factual climatic threats, to try and avoid a bit of fake news around and sensationalism around this topic, and finally to put people together, ecophysiologists with conservation practitioners by both having a forum in which people can ask how to measure thermal tolerance or how to apply it, and other people can reply. And I'm starting right now a round of letters to have people come in and participate on the platform, and also making video demonstrations of easy ways to measure heat tolerance parameters. So anybody in the world can develop a reliable, already tested device that is easy to generate and to be used for measure thermal tolerance and identify thermal vulnerability. So and after all this history, I want to thank everybody. Before I say the end, I want to thank Miguel Tejedo for being such a wonderful host that has been absolutely helpful for everything, and including my whole life. and also Miguel Ángel Carretero and Catarina Brinagre, with having given many insights on lizards and also on fish during our analysis. Marco Gerasi, which I already named in the talk, and also the VULNERAWEB team composed by Alice Jandard, Virginia Vichy-Miller, James Walker, Irisia, Rosie White. Thank you very much for all these Erasmus and volunteers that are working very hard to keep this thing working. Also, I want to thank the people in the TESGA, which provided an absolutely important support to model the ranges of so many species. And everybody here for being here, and all the people in the administration who made the project more efficient. So thanks everybody, and that's it. You can take your questions.
All right, so questions. I can start with one in the chat. Okay. So Javid Picot is asking, he's saying, so heat tolerance and hydric stress tolerances are two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. So especially in a warm scenario. So is there data on water stress tolerance that can be associated to the heat stress tolerance data?
That's a very interesting question. It's just an important challenge to make these vulnerability assessments more reliable. Yeah, water is as much important or even more than heat tolerance, and at some point we're going to need to include water restrictions and thermal restrictions. So that's absolutely important. The problem is that the data availability is still very, very low. So we really need to work on this part in this other side of the problem. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. It was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And great. Congratulations for the final result. That's always important.
It was a lot of work.
Yeah, I believe it. So my question is related to how you account for uncertainty in each step of your analysis, because I assume, and this has been something that's been under increasingly more debate in the literature, that you need to sort of propagate your uncertainty that relates to the climatic variables that you get, because they are more or less certain across different geographic locations, and the measures of heat tolerance. So how is there a way you account for this?
In other words, how can I live with so much uncertainty in this?
Well, it's great to have it. It's just, to put it, how certain am I or not, and because each of your points that you have has a huge confidence interval of.
That is an absolutely important topic. Miguel and I have been debating this a lot of time, and well, there are uncertainties coming from all sides, right? From as I showed, many of them. I cannot provide a statistical control for all those uncertainties, because it's just impossible. We just don't have the data. Like some researchers, they try to correct, for example, for acclimation capacities at the geographic thermal limits, but you try to correct thousands of species or hundreds of species from data on a couple of them. To do this type of corrections, I prefer to just not doing them. I'm not doing them. I correct by things that I can correct, like for example phylogenetic correctedness, and then look at the results. If I find so heavily redundant results across very different independent parameters, like for example here, when I find that across very different parameters of very different species living across the world, the species that have their heat tolerance more challenged by hot temperatures are the ones that are more correlated, are the ones that show stronger correlations between heat tolerance and hot and maximum temperatures. Then I think that these uncertainties, they are there, they are factually there, but they are probably not enough. If they were important enough, they will be erasing this pattern, because they will be so random, like the acclimation process of each of these species working at different habitats will change in different directions the relationships, and the evolution of the geographic variation of the CTmax across the different species in different thermal landscapes will change also differently. So I would expect that all these uncertainties will work randomly, and only if a very constraining and a strong process is present, that we are able to find this. I'm gonna take these glasses that they look weird here, right? I think I'm going to burn this. So I wouldn't expect these results, these so redundant results across different species groups, if there was not a stronger process than all these uncertainties. That's what I.
No, and I agree. But you also have to distinguish between process uncertainty and parameter uncertainty, because you may have certain processes that point in the same way that just may be super uncertain. Anyway, I think you're right. It's just if you want to do projections, like geospatial projections in your web application, I think you need to account for, this could be a way to account for uncertainty of each of your locations, because this is becoming, there's recently been like nature papers and stuff saying that, if you put a map and you don't put an uncertainty map next to it, your map is not very valid, right? So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, because you're giving much more certainty than actually your data can give.
Some locations, in Europe, for instance, I don't know, like in the tropics or whatnot, but you have lots of locations for your lizards, and you may get like very good certainty, because this corresponds to your really steep slopes. In other regions you don't. You just have to like sort of say it. But
I think that's a really important thing to take into account, to kind of show an uncertainty map whenever there is a report. The reports are going to consist of just maps adjusted to the shapefile that the conservationist in question is interested in. So it could be possible to actually add an uncertainty map close to a vulnerability map.
It has to be
yeah.
Otherwise, you give the impression, because otherwise you give the impression that it's super certain, where it may not be. But it's just,
I think there is a little bit of argument to that, because you could show, for example, a map, a heat map, where you have the thermal vulnerability shown, but you still have, you can still advise that you don't know in which part of this heat map the population is going to be, right? So I think that there are ways to. I think that this uncertainty needs to be declared. It needs to be declared, but maybe not necessarily a map. I don't know, but for sure it has to be declared. I mean, There's no question about it. Thank you. Yeah, Milen.
I'm just, following up on that question. Could that contribute to the correlation for the 19th percentile to be higher? Because I suppose people have mostly studied the species they were worried about. So those are the, desert bird species, or, the species that are already being challenged. So would the number of data points for each of those percentile sort of affect the, accuracy of the correlation?
You think that using, I don't know if I understood it well, if using some measure of uncertainty might strengthen these correlations?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you basically have more data points for the 19th percentile, because that's what most people have studied, because they study species that are, expected to be more vulnerable.
Yeah, well, actually, it seems by looking at the dots are kind of transparent to show a little bit some information on the density of observations, and normally I don't. In some cases you have more, right? But I think that you have quite a, even in the worst cases, you have quite a nice amount of data for a species living at less challenging sites. Also, the less challenging sites are not necessarily the hottest, the coldest, are the coldest for their tolerance.
Yep, yep.
So it's possible that these studies, they have happened more frequently at hotter places, but in the end, what we get is a comparison of how challenging a place is for the heat tolerance of the animal. So,
cool.
But I'll take a look into that. All right.
Any final remarks, questions? Nothing? So one more?
Well, thank you for your talk. Very interesting. I wonder if your result, your model, can be or have been proven in the mountains. The mountains, that the temperature decrease, with the altitude. All these animal group can respond in the same way as your models predict. What do you expect? Because mountains are very good scenery, to check that.
These models, right now they're only useful to evaluate whether a given measure of thermal tolerance is able to constrain the maximum temperatures at which a species can live. All right. So if we are thinking of a particular population of a particular species living in a mountain, that's what you mean?
Yeah.
Is this the example, right? So if I find that this species has the maximum temperature at which it can live constrained by its heat tolerance, so it's part of these ones, then I would expect that if at a given place in the mountain the temperatures go over that temperature that was restrictive, then I would expect its populations to recede, to go upwards, or to try and find some thermal refuge. Yeah, I would expect them to actually move as the temperatures reach the value that is maximum the maximum value that they can tolerate. So yeah, I would expect that to work.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's very interesting to.
At least I will use this to identify among the whole number, the full number of species of the place, which ones are more likely to be in thermal vulnerability, and then make deeper studies to identify that, to know that for sure. Okay. But what I think is this approach helps is to identify which are the most likely vulnerable species, and then study that to know it for sure. Thank you.
So one final question from the chat.
Yep.
Elena Angulo is asking, I guess, more a practical question about the webpage. So whether that will contain a database of thermal limits of the different species at the different locations, or just sort of the summary, I guess, that you've presented, the map.
Yeah. Initially, we are thinking of presenting maps that are going to use special databases on temperatures and on locations, and an image of the animal, of the list of animals, and that's going to be presented to the client with an indication of how endangered the species is. So we won't show all the data. We don't want to become into a database, into a huge database system until the heat tolerance databases data increase. But what we want is just to use these databases to create the reports, the maps. So that's it. Okay. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Elena.
All right, so thanks for coming, and see you all back in September.
Thanks. Bye-bye.